guys, and welcome to Be Still and Know. Got a question for you. What is it about the mountains? And why are we supposed to run there? Matthew 24 tells us, in that day, when you see the desolation of sacrilege, to run to the mountains. That's what we're going to talk about today. Why we should go to the mountain. All right, so what is it with the mountains? Well, in Matthew 24, verses 15 and 16, it tells us, and this is the end times kind of thing, Jesus is giving the time when all this is going to happen. It says, so when you see the desolation of sacrilege standing in the holy place, as was spoken by the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. And it's interesting when you look back in the Old Testament and see what happened in the mountains and what happened in the hills and the mountains in the New Testament, which will let us give a get an idea of what happens when we flee to the mountains in that day. So in Exodus chapter 19, we see where Moses was called up to the mountain. God called him up to the mountain to say he wanted to meet his people and tell them and express what they did. So the people had consecrated themselves, and the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and prepare for the third day, because on the third day the Lord will come down upon Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And you shall set limits for the people around, saying, be careful not to go up to the mountain or touch the edge of it. Any who touch the mountain shall be put to death. So Moses was called to the mountain, and that's where God met him, on the mountaintop, in the mountain. He showed himself to Moses in the cleft in the rock in the mountain. So that's something we need to think about. Where does God meet us? Does God meet us everywhere or on the mountain? And the answer is everywhere. But it's interesting that in Matthew, the Lord tells us to flee to the mountains. All right, and Exodus 19 goes on to say, in verse 18, now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. The smoke went up like the smoke of a kiln, while the whole mountain shook violently. And as the blast of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses would speak to God and answer him in the thunder. When the Lord descended upon Mount Sinai, the top of the mountains, the Lord summoned Moses to the top of the mountain, and Moses went up. Here we see the smoke and the cloud. We hear the trumpet, and we hear people called to the top of the mountain. And I think that's why Jesus said, flee to the mountains in Matthew. That's where the Lord meets us, on the mountaintop. If you look at the prophet who was on the mountaintop and the Lord showed him that he wasn't in the wind, he wasn't in the fire, he wasn't in the earthquake, but he was that still small voice. We need to think about that, and think about that still voice, the be still and know voice, the one we put down earthly things and intimately know God, intimately know love. Find that voice, that still small voice, and listen to it, especially in these days. I think we can see that things are going on, and no one knows the day or the hour, not even the angels or the sun. But we can know the seasons. We can know what's going on. We can know that true peace with God is there for us. It's time to put on that armor, and it's time to be alert and seek God, seek the Word. Spend time in the Word, spend time in prayer. so that you'll know on that day what's happening, what's going on. And as we look at this, we know that God revealed himself on the mountain. And Jesus also revealed himself on the mountain. So, in Matthew 17, section about the Transfiguration, in verse 1 it says, 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up high on a mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became like dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah, talking with them. Then Peter said, Lord, it is good for us to make... So, in Matthew chapter 17, tells us that 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. So Jesus took his disciples up to the top of a mountain and appeared in all his glory. And that's, again, on a mountain. And we need to understand that those high places, those mountains, are the abode of God. And he's high and lifted up. He's exalted above the nations. And for us, that's a mountain. For him, it's home. It's where he lives. And God appeared to the people of Israel in the desert at Mount Sinai. He appeared to the disciples on the mountain in his glory. So when we get to Matthew 24 again, it's going to make a little more sense, be a little more clear, just what's going on. So in Matthew 24, it's in the desolation of sacrilege. We know that when the Antichrist sets up his authority in the temple, and whatever vile sacrifices he performs, that's a key point. That's a point that tells us that the time is almost near. And Jesus tells the disciples to flee to the mountains where they'll be safe, that it's going to be a hard trip for some, and that we need to be there for them, I think is the message. Don't turn back to what you need. Just go. And there's going to be pregnant women, and there's going to be nursing infants, and it's going to be winter, and it's going to be cold, or it could be blindingly hot, because we don't know the day. But we have to go to the mountain. We have to go to the mountain where God revealed himself to Israel. We have to go to the mountain where Jesus revealed his glory to his disciples. And we have to be ready for that. And again, that still small voice. We need to listen to it. We need to seek it. We need to go for it. Because without it, we are lost and alone. And how do we get that access to God, to get him? I can't say to get him, so that we can hear his voice speaking. Jesus is the way into that. It's the first part of the armor of God, to be standing on the gospel of peace. And the gospel of peace is this. It's in 1 Corinthians 15, starts in verse 12. It says, now if Christ is proclaimed as raised from the dead, how can some of you say there is no resurrection of the dead? There is no resurrection of the dead, then Christ has not been raised. If Christ has not been raised, then our proclamation had been in vain, and your faith has been in vain. So, if you don't believe or don't understand that Jesus was raised from the dead for us, for our sins, you need to ask somebody. to see where you stand, and to have that helmet of salvation where you know that you're going to be with God and not in salvation from the wrath, where it's going to come. It's the bowls, and it's awful. Goes on to say, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Christ did not perish, then we're not in a good place. Our sins are ours, and we can do no works that's going to free us from our sins. But Jesus did our work. He went to the cross, he died, and was resurrected. And in fact, Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have died. So Jesus was the first fruits. We got sin through Adam and Eve, through Adam, where they openly sinned, and Adam didn't ask for forgiveness. He just kind of blamed it out on Eve. Then came Jesus, who went through horrible tribulation. He was turned over to the synagogues. He was turned over to the authorities. He was turned over by the people. He was beaten, dragged across the city of Jerusalem, made to carry his own cross, and was put on the cross. And he died on the cross. He died for us. Then he carried all our iniquity, all our sins, all our infirmities. And we read that in Isaiah chapter 53. Then he went down and was buried, took our sins, and was resurrected, leaving them behind. And in that belief, in that trust, in that knowing of your heart, if we can be still and understand that, if we can be still and know that that's the love God had for us, then we're doing very well indeed. And that's when we have that breastplate of righteousness, where through Jesus we're given access to God. Have that breastplate of righteousness, that we have approval from God. And it's all the work of Jesus that did it. There's one thing I want you to think about. Think about the mountain. Think about why Jesus told us to go to the mountains and seek shelter there. Because he's on the mountains. He's on the mountain waiting for us. He's transfigured. He's going to reveal himself on the mountain. In that last couple of chapters in Revelation, he sets his foot on the Mount of Olives. So there's something very, very special about mountains as far as God is concerned. And that's where he tells us to go. That's where he reveals himself. And that's where we need to be, where he is, to fully experience his love. And see him exalted above the nations. Hope this helps. Hope this makes sense. Kind of off the cuff, kind of something that's been on my mind a little bit, or a lot. And just trying to get it out there so you can hear and see and know what's going on. Thanks, and God bless. Click like and subscribe, and we'll be back.